Christine George Marie, who got a bachelor's in engineering from Stanford University, came here and got her PhD from Columbia University's Environmental Health Sciences Division. I believe did a rotation in almost everyone's lab, including Lex's lab and my lab, and many other labs. So we all know her, and then is now an associate professor at the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm so happy to be back. I feel like I'm coming home today. It's wonderful, and it's great to see the students. I see myself. So today it's my pleasure to present on, can you hear me okay? So today I'll be presenting on our work developing and evaluating a community-led intervention to reduce arsenic exposure in American Indian communities. And this project is a partnership between our research team at Johns Hopkins, as well as Columbia University, Anna, who's here today, as well as other collaborators, as well as Missouri BRICS, which is the American Indian owned and run research organization. We also partner with tribal governments, and we also partner with Indian Health Service. And so the rationale behind our work is that globally, there are estimated to be over 100 million individuals exposed to elevated arsenic in drinking water. And this problem is even prevalent in the United States, where over 2 million private well users are estimated to have arsenic higher than 10 micrograms per liter. And the onus is on the private well user to ensure that their water is safe. Private wells are not regulated by the EPA. And so owners need to know what the concentration is to intervene upon it and need to take their own action. And so this map here is showing the distribution of arsenic across the US. And so areas that are orange and red are where more than 30% of the water sources have greater than 10 micrograms per liter of arsenic present in private wells. And so the rationale behind our work is the extensive research that Dr. Anna Navas Asian has conducted over the past 10 years in partnership with the Strong Heart Water Study, which is a longitudinal cohort study investigating risk factors for chronic diseases in partnership with the American Indian communities. And through her extensive research and that of her team, she found that chronic arsenic exposure was associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer mortality, diabetes, kidney disease, as well as premature mortality in chronic lung disease. And these findings demonstrated the impact of chronic arsenic exposure in these communities. However, there were very limited interventions currently in place to reduce the exposure. The interventions that were implemented were often one-off in scope, where an arsenic removal device was installed, but there was no type of behavior communication, health communication, no community-led promoters going out to deliver interventions. And so this led us to conduct the Strong Heart Water Study. And the objective is to, in partnership with American Indian communities that were in the Strong Heart Water Study, to develop community-led participatory interventions to reduce arsenic exposure. And this project was funded through an R01 grant from NIHF. And so it's a multi-sectorial approach that's being implemented for the Strong Heart Water Study. And this is absolutely crucial when conducting these types of interventions, to consider all the key stakeholders and to make sure that they're at the table and deciding on the implementation of the intervention. And so in the middle is Missouri BRICS, who is leading the implementation of the research study. And as I mentioned, they're American Indian owned and run research organization led by Marsha O'Leary. In addition, we partner closely with tribal government, which included the tribal water utilities, who had vast information on historical data on arsenic in the area and also a lot of experience with engaging communities. In addition, we partnered with the Tribal Housing Authority. And so this was very important because they were the ones that installed the arsenic removal devices. And so these were installed by people from the community. It wasn't outsiders coming in and installing the devices. In addition, we partnered closely with Indian Health Service, and in particular, Captain David Harvey, and I just provided important technical support for the implementation of the project, as well as the financing for the installation of the arsenic removal devices. Our other partners included a local laboratory, which is Mid-Continent Laboratory, that performed the ICP-MS analyses of the water samples that were collected from study households, and also our academic partners, which include here, Columbia, as well as Johns Hopkins and MedStar. And so now I'll go into our intervention development. And as I mentioned, this was a community-led approach that went into developing the Strong Heart Water Study program. And the participatory approach that we implemented was community workshops. So there were a series of community workshops where community stakeholders, including private well users, elders in the community, health promoters, as well as those of the tribal water utility, and also local IHS staff all came together to discuss their priorities around drinking water and what were the key interventions that they felt should be implemented. And so here I show a ranking exercise that was done during one of the community workshops where community members ranked their priorities related to drinking water. And so you can see very high on the list was the communication of water arsenic testing results. And there were previous researchers that had come in and conducted testing, but had not provided the results to the community. So this was the concern for community members. And in addition, when results were provided to them, there often wasn't sufficient information for community members to understand how that related to their exposure, what action they should take to reduce their exposure. In addition, community members felt the need to learn more about the health implications of exposure to contaminants in water, as well as the need for sustainable solutions. So people were concerned that filters were not a sustainable solution because of the challenges around changing the filter cartridges over time. Knowing when and also the availability of the cartridges in the community. And so through the community workshops, as well as semi-structured interviews that were conducted, we were able to put together a conceptual framework for the Strong Heart Water Study that took the findings from the community and put them together in a framework which allowed us to better understand what were the key challenges and how to address it. And so this was informed by the ecological model. So hopefully if I move away, you can still hear me. And so there were multiple levels. So the first level here, you can see the structural tribal level and thinking about what evidence is needed for sustainable policies around arsenic mitigation. Also thinking about market availability of point of use arsenic filtration devices that are appropriate for the community. When thinking about the community level, thinking about things like water arsenic testing. So in order for you to be able to know whether you have elevated arsenic, you need to have your well tested for arsenic. But in the remote communities that we partner with, there's often a lack of access to water arsenic testing. So there's the need for community-based water arsenic testing programs to be implemented. And then when you're thinking about the household level, you're thinking about what type of arsenic removal devices can be installed in the household. Also thinking about the logistics, how will staff go out to these households, thinking about the day-to-day priorities of the household. Perhaps they have other priorities that they're putting before arsenic exposure, like putting food on their table. So thinking about that and how to implement an intervention in that context. And then at the individual level, thinking about what are people's preferences related to the aesthetic quality of the water. And so when you implement arsenic removal technologies like reverse osmosis, it really removes the taste of the water that people are used to because you're removing a lot of the minerals that are present. And so previous studies have found that the uptake of installing ROs in certain settings are low because people don't want to drink the water. They don't like the taste of it. So thinking about what are the user preferences in the setting. When implementing another filter technology, the water may no longer be cold. And people may really value the temperature of the water that they're drinking and may not want to drink from a device that changes that temperature. So through our intervention development, which was done over a period of 2 years, we were able to closely engage communities and to partner with them to design interventions to reduce their exposure. So now I'll go through the series of interventions that were implemented as part of the Strong Heart Water Study. And so a community water arsenic testing program was implemented, and it included a total of 552 wells that were tested. And so community promoters that knew their communities well went out and collected water samples. They were tested at a local laboratory, and we found that close to a third, 179 of these private wells had arsenic that was above 10 micrograms per liter. In addition, a Hopkins doctoral student, former Hopkins doctoral student, Martha Powers, created maps that are shown here, which were requested by the community as a way to be able to show the water arsenic contamination. And so each of these cells are anonymized so that an individual household cannot be identified. And the cells that are red are where the mean water arsenic concentration is greater than 10 micrograms per liter.
Can I ask you something about that, Christine? What do you mean by randomized? Is the location not correct or?
It's anonymized, not randomized, anonymized.
Okay.
And so the unit is large enough so an individual household can be identified. Nancy, I'm a little nervous to think I'm signed out of Zoom. I just want to make sure that people on the call can see that.
I don't see anything, but I'll ask them.
And so this is the community water arsenic testing. And so the next part of the intervention, if households were found to have elevated arsenic, someone from the community then called them to notify them of the results. And also sent them a letter which explained what the result meant. And so households that had elevated arsenic received, if they were interested in the Strong Heart Water Study, received a point of use arsenic filtration device. And this was an absorptive media filtration device that was manufactured by Multicure. When we picked this over RO because of concerns how RO or reverse osmosis would change the taste of the water. And so this filter goes under the kitchen sink, as you can see here. You have the metal canister, and inside of the metal canister, you have a cartridge. And this is the cartridge that's filtering the arsenic out of the water. And you can see on the top, you have a filter faucet, which is the water coming from the arsenic filter. And then you still keep the main kitchen faucet, because the main kitchen faucet can be used for things like washing hands or washing dishes. And the concern being that you don't want to use too much of the water coming through the filter cartridge, because then the cartridge will have to be changed more frequently. And so that's why we keep both the kitchen, main kitchen faucet as well as the filter faucet. And so in addition, so once households have their arsenic removal device installed, and as I mentioned, this is installed by community members, so plumbers that were in the community, not outsiders. Then the next key component was delivery of the health communication program. And this was done by community health promoters. And so this included a mobile health program where households received phone calls from health promoters that explained the importance of drinking and cooking with arsenic safe water, and to follow up with them about any challenges that they may have encountered. And then also text messages were sent to households to follow up with them. And the idea was that mobile health is an approach that's much more scalable to implement than home visits, particularly in remote settings where you may have to drive an hour or 2 hours to get to a household. So it's a low cost way to be able to reinforce the importance of using arsenic safe water for both drinking and cooking. And something interesting that we found through our initial formative research was that many households thought boiling water would remove arsenic when it actually concentrates it. And so this was something that was reinforced through the calls as well. And also saying that it was okay to use the arsenic filter faucet or to use the kitchen faucet for things like washing hands and washing dishes, to not overuse the cartridge so it would not last as long. In addition, we had an intensive arm of our study, and I'll go through this in more detail, and that arm received home visits from a promoter. So the promoter went to their household for 3 times to deliver key messaging, and this was at 2 weeks, 1 month, and 6 months to follow up on them, and they delivered videos. So they had testimonial videos that were from community members, where community members explained the importance of using arsenic safe drinking water. It also talked about the importance of reducing arsenic exposure within the community. The next key behavior, and a very important one, is changing the arsenic removal device cartridge. And so our recommendation was that households change their arson removal device cartridge after 12 months. As part of our project, we provided one additional cartridge for people to change out. And to encourage households to do so, videos were created. So it was an instructional video that was created by a community health promoter showing households how to change their arsenic removal device cartridge. And so you can see this is a screenshot from the video here. And so what households have to do is they have to unscrew this from the wall, open it up, take their cartridge out, and then put a new cartridge in. And so in Tracy Zacker's presentation, which will come after this, she'll talk more about how many households actually did this and what were some of the challenges that they encountered.
Can I ask you another question? Do you mind? How much information did you have to know whether 12 months was not too long or much too short? What
So that's a great
preliminary data
question.
did you have?
So we did a pilot study for 9 months. And we showed at 9 months that the concentration, we were able to look at how much water had passed through the filter and also the water arsenic concentration, and it gave us the estimate. So based on that, we made the recommendation of 12 months. And also Tracy in her presentation will talk about how we think they last even longer than 12 months. And it's really dependent on how many people are in the household. But based on the data that we had, it showed that I think it was 93% of households, they were okay. Going forward, I think it would be good to have studies that have water meters for longer periods of time to look at that, but that's what our recommendation was based on.
But it might depend on the type of water, right? It could change from the.
Yeah, so we were concerned about things like silica. So if silica was really high, that would spend the filter. But we did look at the geochemistry of the water during our pilot study, and we didn't find silica to be very high. And so based on through implementing these interventions, we were interested to evaluate them in the context of conducting a randomized control trial. And this was the first randomized control trial of an arsenic filter intervention in the US. And globally, there was one other one that was implemented in Bangladesh previously. And so this study was conducted in our partner American Great Plains community. We had a total of 84 participants that came from 50 households. And they were randomized to be in one of 2 arms. And so the first arm received the mHealth program that I showed earlier with the voice and text messages, and then received the arsenic filter. And this was called our mHealth and filter arm. And then we had a second arm that received the same intervention plus 3 home visits. And this was considered to be our intensive arm. And as I mentioned earlier, the mHealth arm is considered our more scalable arm, but we wanted to see if there was any additional added benefit of the home visits for delivering the program. And so here I show our evaluation. And so this study was a wonderful opportunity to be able to follow households for a longer duration. Very often when these type of studies are implemented, households are followed for 4 months or 6 months. Even as a doctoral student, I was only able to follow households for 6 months. But in this study, we followed households for 2 years. So this allowed us to look further out to see if the intervention was effective in terms of reducing urinary arsenic exposure. We collected a urine sample at baseline, and then at the end of our 2-year follow-up, we also collected water samples, and Tracy Zacher will present on that in the next presentation. And then we obtained information on self-reported drinking and cooking with arsenic safe water. And this was done across both of our study arms. And so now I'll go into our exciting results. So here we show both of our study arms combined, and we'll show stratified arms in the next slide. And we observed a significant reduction in urinary arsenic from baseline to our final follow-up visit during our 2-year study period. So here you can see in red is the baseline urinary arsenic concentration, and then in blue is at our follow-up. And overall, it was a 48% reduction in urinary arsenic exposure. So we were very excited about these findings, and it showed that the intervention was highly effective in terms of reducing urinary arsenic within our partner community. So in addition, when we stratified by study arms, we saw an even stronger impact when we looked at our mHealth and filter only arm, with a reduction in urinary arsenic being 57%. And that's shown here. And then we saw less strength for the intensive arm, which was really surprising for us. But also we faced some challenges with fidelity with our intensive arm due to the pandemic hitting and not always being able to implement our home visits. So we think that's potentially one of the reasons why it's lower.
Isn't it also because your initial arsenic was lower for your intensive?
Yeah, the initial arsenic was lower.
That seems to be maybe the main reason.
Yeah, it's possible, but we would have expected a stronger impact potentially, but we didn't see it. But yeah, that definitely is a factor. So next we looked at self-reported exclusive use of arsenic safe drinking water between baseline and then our final follow-up visit during our 2-year study period. And we saw huge increases. So going from 12%, and arsenic safe water was defined as either water from the filter faucet or bottled water. Those were the 2 ones that were classified as arsenic safe. And so reported usage among households increased from 12% to 43%. And this result was statistically significant for drinking water. And then for cooking water, it was even larger, going from 17% to 50% at the end of the 2-year study period. So this showed that we reduced urinary arsenic exposure and also people reporting that they're using the arsenic safe water source for drinking and cooking. So now I want us to go into our qualitative evaluation. And so this was something really exciting for me because the randomized controlled trial is very important to quantitatively assess the exposure reduction. But at the same time, there's things that don't come out through a quantitative assessment, these contextual, psychosocial, technological challenges that are faced when implementing an intervention, which you really want to know about because when you're taking something to scale, you want to consider those things and refine your intervention even further to target that. So a qualitative evaluation was done, and this was led by both Kelly Endres, who's here today, as well as Darcy Anderson, who is a postdoc on my research team, to look at the different psychosocial and contextual factors that were influencing the intervention. And in particular, at the implementer level, so this is your health promoters, people who are installing the arsenic removal devices, we found that it was really, really important that they were from the community and that they understood really well the local context in terms of their ability to engage communities, but also their social ties, which really enhanced the trust that community members had in them coming in their home and installing the device, as well as their trust in the device itself. Some of the challenges we had were these were really remote households. So some households were, let's say, 13 miles off of a main dirt road. So very far out places, very difficult to reach. And so that was a challenge with setting up the home visits. And one of the reasons why the home visits would likely never be scaled in this type of program. In addition, there were federal restrictions. So IHS is allowed to finance the installation of arsenic removal devices, but they can't finance the arsenic cartridges over time. And so that's a major challenge when thinking about the sustainability of this type of program. And we actually have a meeting later this week with IHS to discuss our findings and hopefully be able to brainstorm additional solutions for that. In addition, we also looked at the community members themselves during our qualitative evaluation to understand better what were their facilitators and barriers to performing the key behaviors, so using the filter faucet for drinking and cooking. And through this, they said that social support was really important for them, particularly for elders in the community, and often those living in very remote locations are elders. And so they may not be able to change the arsenic removal device cartridge because of physical limitation, for example. And so they were able to get support from family members to be able to change the arsenic removal device cartridge. In addition, we found that knowledge was an important driver. So people who had higher knowledge in the beginning of the study, they were more likely to use the arsenic removal device over time. And Kelly Endres will talk some about her findings related to the psychosocial factors later on. And then finally, we found that those that had experience with home repair, which is a lot of our households, given the remoteness, they may not be able to have a technician come out so easily to their home. So those who had experience with home repair were more likely to be able to change the arsenic removal device cartridge. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there was the barrier for the physical limitation for those that were trying to change their devices. that were elders in the community or those that didn't have the strength to be able to unhinge the cartridge. So in addition, we were interested in ranking what were the most successful versus what were the most challenging aspects of implementing the intervention. And so when we spoke to people, something that was really important is they felt like the intervention was appropriate for the setting, that the intervention was filling a need in the community that was not existing, and they thought it was really important to continue this type of program. When looking at the acceptability of the filter was really high, and that was demonstrated also in the exposure reductions that we observed. We found that the penetration was good within the community in terms of those that agreed to have their wells tested, and also those that agreed to be part of our study. However, we found that adoption was high among those who were aware of the health implications of arsenic, but less so for those who are not as aware. And we also faced major challenges with COVID. So we were about 2/3 into our study when the pandemic hit. And so it made it so that we weren't able to collect blood at the final follow-up visit. It also made it so that our promoters couldn't go out and deliver the intervention. And so it also made it so we weren't able to enroll the households we had planned. You probably saw in the earlier slide, there were 179 households that had elevated arsenic, but we only included 50 in our randomized control trial. So COVID was definitely a challenge in terms of completing a trial. So we were happy that the intervention was successful. In addition, as I mentioned, one of the most challenging aspects were the feasibility. Being able to visit these more remote households was really a challenge. And then the piece on sustainability that I mentioned. So people need to have replacement cartridges over time for this program to be successful. And that was really challenging due to the financing structure the IHS has, but also thinking in partnership with the community going forward, how community assets can be used going forward. For example, housing cartridges at the Tribal Housing Authority or at the water utilities so people can come and get them, seeing if local stores would be willing to supply the cartridges, seeing what the real cost would be to buy these cartridges in bulk, for example. So we're currently working on those as potential solutions. So now I wanted to go through our lessons learned. And so we learned the importance of multi-sectorial approaches for implementing our interventions. This was absolutely crucial to overcome challenges that we encountered. We learned the value of having the community be the ones that are leading the intervention. So rather than have outsiders come and deliver this intervention, it was very important that people in the community help to develop the intervention and also implement the intervention. And then finally, we found that through our randomized control trial, the intervention was highly effective in terms of reducing arsenic exposure, and that these home visits were not needed. So having a community plumber come and install the arsenic removal device, and then having that be reinforced through calls and text messages was sufficient to substantially reduce urinary arsenic exposure by 57%. So it's quite substantial. So that's really promising for the community going forward and things in terms of thinking of scaling this type of approach. And so that concludes my part of the presentation. And I just wanted to acknowledge all the many partners that have implemented the Strong Hard Water Study, including those at Missouri Breaks and those here at Columbia, both Anna as well as the laboratory team, Ronald, and Olga for their support in implementing the study, and then our partners at Johns Hopkins, as well as any health service, and our environmental consultants in the community, as well as our partners at MedStar. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on this part of the presentation. And as I mentioned, after this, Tracy will present on her findings related to the water arsenic component in terms of the filters and how well they work to remove arsenic. And then Kelly Andreas will be presenting on her work on the behavioral determinants of use of arsenic safe water. Thank you. Other questions?
Should we maybe do the three presentation?
You want to do the green questions at the end?
Let me do them at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds great. Is Tracy here?
Yeah, she's there.
Can you hear me?
Okay, I can introduce you, Tracy. I can see you now.
Unshare, so she.
Oh, okay.
And I'm gonna share my screen.
Oh, you're sharing screen. There we go. Right to stop sharing.
I think I did.
Okay.
Um,
So while Tracy's putting her slides up, I just wanted to introduce her. Oops, I just want to close this here. There we go. So Tracy Backer is our project coordinator for the Strong Her Water Study, and it's been my pleasure to work closely with her over the past 6 years. Tracy led the show. So she led the implementation of the randomized control trial, led the evaluation component, ensuring all the urine samples as well as the water samples were collected within the time frame. And her study is really important because she was able to follow households for the 2 years and to be able to collect the water samples to see how well the arsenic filter devices were working. So thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so, whoops, hold on. Get my bearings on my presentation here. Okay. So my name's Tracy Zocker. Thank you for having me today. I was, as Christine said, the project coordinator for this study. I'm a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe, and I have been doing research in Indian country since 2011. I work for Missouri Breaks Industries Research Incorporated, and that is an American Indian-owned medical firm conducting research and disseminating findings through its network of healthcare providers, tribal leaders, and community members. So the goal of this study, as you know, was to work with the community to develop and evaluate interventions to reduce arsenic exposure among private well users in the Northern Plains. American Indian households with an arsenic level at or greater than an MCL of 10 micrograms per liter were eligible to enroll into the study. And as Christine mentioned, the study was funded by the National Institutes of Health. So here, as mentioned earlier, all households enrolling in the study received a point of use arsenic filter. And in this picture, you can see the arsenic filtration system. You have your main faucet, the filter faucet, and the filter and canister under the sink. And Missouri Breaks coordinated the installation of these devices and promoted the use of the arsenic removal device using 2 different interventions. Tribal Housing Authority installed the arsenic removal devices in the homes. Indian Health Service provided the funding for the installation. And our academic partners at Johns Hopkins, Columbia Universities, and MedStar Research helped to analyze the data. And Mid-Continent Laboratory out of Rapid City, South Dakota, which is about 90 miles from our community, did the arsenic water testing from the kitchen and filter faucets. So once installed, we recommended to the household members that the filter be changed after a year of use. Training videos were developed on how to change their filter, and those videos were provided to one arm of the study, while the other arm received written material and phone calls. It should be noted, however, that both arms of our study received the training videos at the end. All households with arsenic levels at or above the MCL were asked to join the study. As we said previously, all households received an arsenic filtration device. Households that joined the study were randomized into what we called the standard arm or mHealth arm, or the intensive arm, also the home visits plus mHealth. 84 participants ended up in the standard arm and 50 participants ended up in the intensive arm. Standard arm households received written materials, phone calls, and text messages. Intensive arm households received written materials also, the phone calls, text messages, but also received home visits and were shown the videos that were created. The mean baseline kitchen faucet water arsenic concentration was 20.4 micrograms per liter, with no differences by study arm. For households followed after baseline, the mean for the final arsenic concentration for the filter faucet was less than 1 microgram per liter. And we tested the water about 4 times throughout the duration of the study, including the final visit. Oh, I didn't realize this, sorry. So we found a 91% reduction in water arsenic from the filter compared to the kitchen faucet at the final visit. So the filtration systems installed were highly effective at filtering the water arsenic. In addition, 46% of households reported changing their filter cartridge at least once during the study period. 44% for the M and home health and home visits arm, and 48% for the M health only arm. There was no significant temporal variation observed over the study period in kitchen water arsenic concentration or in the filter water arsenic concentration. So basically, summary of findings. 93% of arsenic filter faucet samples had arsenic concentrations of less than 10 micrograms per liter during the 2-year follow-up. 46% of households reported changing their cartridge at least once during the study period, and there was no significant temporal variation observed over the study period in kitchen water arsenic concentrations. And I know that was pretty quick. That concludes my presentation. And I just want to thank those that participated in this research. There's lots of people and entities that made this study possible. It really did take a village to do this. For Missouri Breaks, those in the red box, I want to just recognize, and those are the folks who did the field work. They were our boots on the ground. Also, I'd like to recognize and thank the folks at Columbia University and Johns Hopkins. And I'd also like to recognize and thank those at IHS, our consultants, especially Reno Red Cloud. He was our tribal liaison that was very instrumental in assisting us, and MedStar Research Institute. Pilamaya, thank you for your time. Do we want to go to the next presentation and then questions at the end?
Yeah, yes, I think so. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
So now while we're loading the slides, I wanted to introduce our next speaker, who's Kelly Endres. And Kelly Endres was a student in our group, and now she's a research data analyst. And she was instrumental also in the qualitative work, which I mentioned earlier. She was able to go and visit the communities and to conduct some that were implemented. In addition, she'll present today on her work looking at the behavioral determinants of the use of arsenic safe water. And these types of studies are really important. People, again, are usually focusing on the quantitative, did we reduce exposure, but not trying to understand what are the underlying behavioral determinants that are driving people's decision to use an arsenic safe water source. So thank you so much, Kelly.
All right. Yes, great. Thank you so much. Well, thank you guys so much for having us today. I'm very excited to be here and finally be presenting in person. I had a realization earlier today. This is my first in-person presentation since before COVID, because all of my degree was online. So yeah, I'm very excited to be doing this. And fortunately, I get to skip a lot of the background stuff because Christine Marie and Tracy went over it so well. So we have a little bit more time for the discussion. Okay. So as Christine Marie and Tracy showed, we already know that our intervention successfully reduced arsenic in urine. However, by examining the behavioral determinants of our arsenic safe water use, we can get more into how and why the intervention worked. So briefly, behavioral determinants or psychosocial factors of health are any factor which strongly influences and affects behavior as it relates to health. This is a very brief description, but this is one of the models that we used to develop and analyze our intervention. This is the risks, attitudes, norms, ability, and self-regulation model of health behavior change. It's a easily applied method that measures the behavioral factors, assesses their influence on behavior, helps you design these strategies to change the behavior, and also then measures the effectiveness. You can see you have your specific behavior change techniques, which affect the factors, and then hopefully result in your desired behavior, all while being affected by the social, physical, personal context, and a lot of other factors going on. We also used some other, were informed by other models as well as developing something specific from our formative research. But this was the primary model that we used. And as you've already seen, this behavior change was very important for our program, right? Because we decided to go with the point of use option instead of treating water for the whole house. So we needed to make sure that people were using their filter faucet instead of the main faucet for the drinking and cooking water, and then also to get people to change their arsenic removal device. So overall, we looked at 11 different behavioral determinants through 37 different item questions, and these are just a few examples of them. So looking at, for example, perceived vulnerability, which is that perceived risk of health problems from arsenic exposure. And one of our example questions, so how high or low are the chances of you getting health problems from arsenic if it's in your well water? And then also an example of self-efficacy here, which is the belief in one's abilities to confront and manage possible situations, again with an example question. I won't go through all the questions because there are many of them, and I'm always happy to go through them with you afterwards. And then also looked at commitment strength, so how committed you are to performing the behavior. We administered questionnaires at baseline and each of our follow-up visits for these questions. We used a 5-point Likert scale, which if you're not familiar, you have the question, and then you can say, I think my chances of getting health problems from arsenic in my water are very low to very high, which was tweaked a little bit for the specific types of questions that we had. And then we also looked again at the exclusive use of arsenic safe water. This was self-reported, again with the questionnaire at baseline and our follow-up visits. And then again looked at drinking, cooking, and then a combination variable of those two. We specifically designed the intervention to target these different behavioral determinants or psychosocial factors. These were targeted in different ways in both of our study arms. So, for example, for perceived vulnerability, for both study arms, this was in the mobile health intervention. So, talking about health risks associated with arsenic exposure. And then also these were targeted further in the intensive arm with the videos, talking about the video testimonials of exposure and the health effects, things like cancer and heart disease and diabetes. For self-efficacy, this was addressed in both arms, again, through the mobile health component about strategies to overcome different challenges and suggestions for how to facilitate using water from the filter faucet for drinking and cooking needs. Further emphasized again in the video testimonials. And then for things like commitment strength, we didn't have this specifically targeted in just the mobile health intervention, but in our video testimonials talking about persevering through the challenges you have with the arsenic filter to continue performing or to continue using it for your drinking and cooking water. So we had 3 different main findings that we looked at. First, we looked at the change in behavioral determinants over our 2-year study period. So these are combined over our study arms because of the sample size. And again, I can get more into any small differences we had in those as well. And we found no difference in those factors at baseline between the 2 study arms. So we found an increase in the perceived vulnerability to health problems from elevated arsenic. We found an increase in the ability to obtain safe water for drinking and for cooking, which was that self-efficacy variable. We found a decrease in the perceived use of arsenic unsafe well water for drinking in the community, which is a descriptive norm, which I have my definitions here because I kept forgetting them. But perceptions about the behaviors commonly performed by others in your community. And then we also had an increase in the perceived disapproval of peers using arsenic unsafe water for drinking, cooking, which is a injunctive norm, which was perceptions about behaviors or perceptions of your peers about behaviors that are performed. Our second finding that we looked at was the influence of these behavioral determinants at baseline on arsenic safe water use. Again, we combined our two study arms for these analyses. We found that baseline higher perceived vulnerability was associated with exclusive use of arsenic safe water at follow-up, and this was for that combined drinking and cooking variable. We also found higher commitment strength was associated with this, as well as higher self-efficacy, specifically in these three components. So ability to use, to find local resources about arsenic and water, the usefulness of these resources, and then confidence in the ability to use the point of use arsenic filter. And lastly, as we emphasized in our previous presentations, the influence of behavioral determinants on changing the arsenic filter cartridge, which was very important. And while we would have liked this to be a bit higher, as you saw in Tracy's presentation, we did find that that higher perceived vulnerability was also associated with, on a household level, changing the arsenic filter during the follow-up period, as well as higher self-efficacy, specifically in confidence in the perceived ability to obtain water with a safe level of arsenic for drinking and cooking. All right, so for the summary of our findings, first of all, really interesting, we found perceived vulnerability to be significant for each of our three findings. So specifically, perceived vulnerability and self-efficacy influenced exclusive use of arsenic safe water and were increased by the Strong Heart Water Study program. So that was a really important finding, that those were both important there. And then perceived vulnerability also influenced the arsenic filter cartridge change. So exciting that we saw that in all three of our findings, especially because this gives us insight into the different behavioral factors that should be targeted, again, specific to your location and which populations you're working with, but what could be targeted in future interventions. And also just generally that this type of theory-driven, context-specific research, which had a lot of time and effort spent in development, can influence behavior change to reduce water arsenic exposure. And then also that our program is really exciting. It can serve as a model for these type of intervention approaches that engage communities to reduce arsenic exposure. So that was quick. I'm glad we have time to discuss more. Again, thanks to the many people who worked on this program, who I only just got to meet some of because I came in more towards the end of this. And then this is a picture from when I was out there. It's just a really beautiful country. So I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to work with all the folks out there. So yeah, that's the end of our three presentations, and now we can have our discussion.
I thought there were a lot of questions online.
Oh,
Yes, you can check the questions online, and we can.
No,
They're just clapping and. So questions, let's start questions here.
I have so many questions. This is phenomenal. It's so fun to see this come all the way to the end. I think this was the last time I spoke, you were talking about, we just submitted a grant to do this. So it's cool to see it. So my question, I guess, so you had 84 participants from 50 households, right? So there are a few participants that overlapped in households.
yes.
So I'm curious too, that got me thinking, does it matter how many people were in the household? So I assume if you're alone, that might influence if you're going to use your filter, or if not. Have you thought about that?
Yes, that's a great question. So we use generalized estimating equations that allowed us to cluster or adjust for clustering within the household. Because that's something that's very important, the household size. So that's something that was adjusted for in our regression model. And it really varied. I recall we had one household, we had 5 participants. And so we really had to range between households where it was just 1 participant and then one where it was 5.
Do you know that maybe what would be interesting to, in addition to how many were in the study, is to look at the size of the household? Because that was another variable that we collected.
Yeah.
And how does that relate how much the level at the 2 years, maybe the few filters that we saw that were not in compliance with the water is because they were larger families?
So we did look at
Yeah,
that.
Okay.
I remember having issues with sample size about looking at that. I can't remember specifically what we found, but we did at one point in the past year and a half look at that.
Can we share?
And that's definitely something I want to look back on.
She has to share.
Oh, she has to share it. So on Tracy's slide, when we looked at the 93% of the filters that had arsenic that was below 10 micrograms per liter, there were three households where there were exceedances. And those were all households that had large household sizes. And we may have enrolled 5, but there could have been 10 people in the household. And we had,
Two were large. One was a filter.
and we had one failure.
Two were large households.
Yeah, we had one where it failed at baseline. And we were able to identify that because we do the testing as soon as it's installed. So the community plumbers are collecting a water sample when the filter devices are installed, and that's sent to the laboratory. And that's interesting, is this was actually requested by the community members. They said, we're not using that until we know that it's safe. And I agree with them. I think we all could agree with that. And so we sent it to the lab, and then we were able to give them the results and show them that, yes, it was arsenic safe. And in that one case, there was a manufacturer defect. And we went and we contacted the company, and they sent us another filter.
Went low then, or it's staying high?
Oh,
It went
yeah,
down.
once we installed a new cartridge, it went back down.
There's a couple of online questions and somebody with their hand raised.
Are there other questions in the room? Yeah. So this was the inorganic arsenic that we were reporting. We looked at the speciation also, and we actually did see a significant decline in MMA within the study population, which is a very positive finding that we observed.
I believe it was it's the sum of the inorganic methylate. Yes, that's what we use. And then, yeah, the lab here, Catherine is here from there. Yeah,
And thank you for analyzing our samples. And is Ronald here? No.
yeah, he's
Oh, you're online. Thank you, Ronald. And Ben, you had a question?
So related to the fact that the failures you did see are places where there was probably more water going through the filter. If you collected data today, especially now that people are less, in the loop of the educational component, do you think that you'd have more failures? Like, partly because people haven't replaced the filter, or
Yeah,
all
likely.
these other things that eventually it starts to fall into line, and the reason your results are so positive is you only measured it for the lifetime of the filter in some way?
Yeah, so we followed it. It was a 2-year study period. And so the life of the filter was supposed to be 12 months. So it was a little bit longer than that. But I agree that if we looked at now, we would probably see more failures. And that's why the sustainability piece is so crucial. How can we put a mechanism in place that can ensure that cartridges are available to households and that they're changing the cartridges?
And somewhat as a follow-on question then, how much of the success is just due to the fact that you chose a filter that actually works for a pretty long time, as opposed to the educational component? Like, what's the minimum education that you think you need to provide to people to get this good result?
And that's an important research question, but I think also from an ethics standpoint, given the extensive findings from the work that Anna's done showing that in her team on the health implications of chronic arsenic exposure, it's really important that those findings are disseminated, even if they're not the driver of people using arsenic safe water within the community. It's important that those results are shared so that people are aware of the findings.
Do we have any, sorry, because this is kind of related to what Ben asked, do we have how many text messages were sent, or did people respond like they received it? Because I don't think it was too intensive. I think it was pretty minimal.
So we had 3 text messages that were sent, 3 calls. 3 calls as part of the mHealth program, and then text messages were sent. We added an additional text message during the COVID pandemic to send out to people. So it was not an intensive intervention. But we have also, and we haven't gone through and analyzed that data yet, we have information on exposure. So not just how many we send to people, how many people themselves report receiving. And so we have that information also. We didn't use interactive voice response here, so people didn't respond back yes or no. But we use that both in Bangladesh and Congo, and I think it's a promising intervention globally to be able to engage people through mobile health programs.
There's like 3 or 4 on there.
Okay.
Starting with Steve Spade.
I think it was Peter that had a hand up.
Yeah.
Peter,
Steve
did
Spade
you
had-
want to ask your question?
He actually typed it in.
Oh, did you type it in? Okay.
Maybe can you read it, Nancy, if you see it easier than Christine?
Oh, I'm making it larger now. Okay, so Stephen had 2 questions. So he wants to know about the retail cost of the replacement cartridges, and that's a great question. At the time that we conducted a study, we purchased them for $60 US. But I'm not sure now what the cost would be. We know everything is inflated now.
Yeah, this is Tracy. I could tell you when we referred them to the website, if someone were to buy it individually, it would, and this was pre-pandemic, it was $125. The $60 was a discounted rate when we purchased them in bulk.
And so that's an important point,
You
but
can't buy this model at all anymore, as far as I know.
yeah, the 124 was on Amazon. That was the Amazon price on that. So I think it would be important to contact the company themselves to see what the rate would be. And as I mentioned earlier, I think buying them wholesale is a much more promising option if there was a way to buy them wholesale and have them stocked in the community for people to be able to get them over time as they needed them. Okay, so the next question by Steve was related to the reduction of urinary arsenic. And while 50% was great, it's still the urinary arsenic is at 7 micrograms. So I think something important to remember here is that the EPA guideline in water is 10 micrograms per liter. It's not 0. And so people are still gonna have urinary arsenic present in their urine. And also people are potentially drinking other sources. We found that exclusive use of arsenic safe water for drinking and cooking didn't exceed 50%. So people are consuming other sources as well that are contributing to their exposure. So that's a great question, Stephen. Okay, and then Giannis asked about self-reporting. And so we know self-reporting is always challenging. That's why the urinary arsenic measure is so important, to be able to look at people's actual biomarker of arsenic exposure. And that's the reason why we both collected self-reported information as well as collected people's urine samples. Okay, then Peter, hi Peter. So Peter asked a question about identifying failures and how to resolve them. Okay, so I'm not clear if it's failures overall on program implementation or filter failures. For filter failures, since we were conducting a study, it was important for us to do the testing. And so as Tracy mentioned, we did the testing at 4 different time points, and that provided really valuable information. I think our qualitative manuscript came out, I think about a month ago, and that provides important information about failures with implementation. And I think that's extremely important, because even though we had an intervention that was successful, we have challenges. And it's important to share those and be open about those. And so our manuscript is out there that shares that, and we're happy to distribute that. Are there other questions?
Yeah, so, one very technical question on the flow rate. I mean, typically those filter only flows are not enough to fill up a big pot of water quickly. Did you ask any questions whether that was an issue for any of the families?
Yeah, so that's a major challenge. And so we identified that during our piloting. And so what was provided to households with a tanker, which is a large container with a tap on it for people to fill up and keep, let's say, on their kitchen counter. So that when they had to cook large quantities of water, they can flip it and then have it go into there when the flow rate was a lot quicker. But as you know, with filtration technologies, flow rate is often a major challenge.
So I didn't, Darcy, the postdoc who wrote the qualitative paper, she could be much more specific about it, but we didn't hear as much feedback about the flow rate as we expected from people. We thought that that was gonna be much more talked about, and it wasn't as prevalent in those discussions.
And hopefully it's because in the pilot we heard it, but we didn't
Yeah.
hear it in our RCP. It's probably because we addressed it, hopefully.
Yeah, I just want to, this is Tracy, I just want to mention that actually one of our pilot participants came up with a solution to improve the flow rate, which he then passed on to the, and it was a certain like plumbing, it's called a T. And he passed that on to the IHS or the tribal housing authority who were installing them. And so they were able to use that T to improve the flow rate.
And that was really important. It was a community innovation.
Lex has a question and let's go to Lex's question and then people are welcome to leave and we can stay for longer for those of us who would like to stay discussing.
Fantastic intervention. It looks like it went a lot better than what Mary conducted and Stephanie analyzed. My question though is, you've shown us a great data set. I don't think you've shown us a baseline water arsenic and how did those averages compare?
So that was shown in Tracy's slides. Tracy, can you share the slide quick? So
Lex,
we
you were
can see
having
that?
coffee when she showed.
Yeah.
What's that difference between, so I think I heard it didn't change over. So that was no difference between intervention.
They were the same, yeah.
So you wonder what was different about the urine at baseline.
But for instance, something that Christine didn't show is what happened with the uranium. And the uranium didn't change at all.
Yeah, it didn't.
So that shows you that the intervention is specifically working because it's removing the arsenic. It's not a before and after, misleading because of something happening with COVID also, lots of things could have changed before and after.
Tracy, can you go to the slide for the baseline arsenic?
No, that's fine, but why was there
Thank you.
no difference in average water arsenic, but a huge difference in urine arsenic? That's still.
No,
And it wasn't the input to output, but the input value and the output value were the same every time.
That was for the kitchen,
Here's
the kitchen
Tracy's putting
faucet.
up the slide here in a second.
Yeah, it's the kitchen faucet.
Oh, I'm
They
blocking
treated-
it. I'm sorry. I just want to show the urine first.
The
We can look at that.
treated water arsenic was 90% reduction, Lex. It's completely removed.
Okay, so this is the urine. So I think Lex you're referring to, I have to go to the next one.
What's
The difference, yeah, the difference here from here.
No, he's
Oh.
referring to the water.
Which slide?
Lex was asking, one second, Kelly, you were talking about the urinary arsenic being lower to begin with in the intensive arm. I remember you mentioned
That's
that.
right, and I was, and I think I've been told that the water was no different, and so
Yes.
I'm wondering. what was different?
Is it the other one?
They don't have.
So Tracy, go to the
Maybe it's the-
line, the spaghetti
Yeah, I think it's the one,
Yeah, here you
before-
can see the huge change of
I
the
think it's before
filter.
that one.
Yeah, go to the last one, but.
This
you
is
don't-
nice too.
but
This
you
one?
don't-
This was showing that we had about 4 time points for each household for the water
You have
arsenic
a version
sample.
of that slide that with different colors showed the.
Oh, we have that in the manuscript, but we don't have that here.
Yeah. I have what
But we can share the manuscript.
That's,
see it.
yeah, some of you, and you can see that they completely overlap, but I
So
think
this is the filter faucet over time. This isn't showing the kitchen faucet.
Okay, this is.
The intensive arm were a little bit lower to start with.
Oh, this one is the
Yeah.
kitchen faucet,
Yes,
yeah.
we have that.
But that's what I was missing.
Yes. There is a question.
There's a second question about compensation.
Oh, so we can address the compensation, and Maya, that's a compensation for the webinar? Oh, that's not my question.
Two questions.
Okay.
Yes.
I was wondering if anybody knows, since we've discussed that the previous water filter has been discontinued, if you know whether that water filter is specific to filtering out a specific type of arsenic, like arsenic 5 or arsenic 3.
And so in terms of, so the ones that we focus on are mostly filtering out the trivalent form of arsenic.
Arsenic 3, okay.
No, I think arsenic 5.
Is it 3?
It's 5.
It does,
Most of the arsenic in OSD is 5.
or was it both? I have to go back and
I
check.
think it's both.
Okay, I was looking online because I was trying to find the exact model, but I couldn't find it. So if it does both, then that's really cool to see that it's, okay, that's great.
Yeah, during our pilot, they did reduce both.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was both of them. Is there another question?
Mary.
Some of the participants didn't change the filter, is that correct?
Yeah, so 46% of participants, or 46% of households changed the filter.
So doesn't it?
between the people who changes those who didn't.
I know Kelly and Tracy looked at that.
I wanted to see.
Yes.
Can you repeat the question for Tracy? I'm not sure Tracy.
So Tracy, the question was related to the filters, and so some households changed the filters and some didn't. And so did we compare the water arsenic concentrations between the households that changed the filters and those that didn't change the filters?
Yeah,
At the end.
yeah, and we didn't see a difference.
So it continued working for.
Yes, yes.
I think one of the things that, and Tracy can correct us here, I think some families were not really using their filter. So their water looks perfectly clean because after 2 years, they were not using it. So that's a concern that I recall us discussing that, and that could be also related with why the urinary arsenic decline is not as successful as the water decline.
It's not exclusive use in most of the households, as we saw, that some people are using other water sources also. We have information on the type of other water sources that people are using.
But overall, it's really remarkable study, and actually, it's too bad we didn't show the percentage of the MMA because Mary would have been very interested, and there was a decline.
We'll share that with you, Mary.
Yes.
So I have a more general question. I mean, I remember, Christine, that you're the one who very much pushed for community participation when we started working together in Bangladesh. And that having a local test that would make a difference, with result, right, as you may remember. You're not really, I mean, so your first point in the conclusion was community participation is important, but you didn't really test for that.
No, we didn't test it here. This is something that came out qualitatively. Where people said we really trusted more when you came and installed the device because you were from the community.
We could not have done this study without the community.
I agree, but let's just be clear, that's not result number one from the result. I mean, right?
But I think in
not the
terms of
trial.
implementation, we didn't investigate that as the trial, but qualitatively, that was something that was really important.
Where I think I would agree that community participation is important here is
I'm not.
without it, we wouldn't have ever even gotten installed into
That's right,
that.
it just wasn't tested. I wanted
Yeah.
to.
But I agree, the amount of education appears to need to be very little, which is really quite impressive, and I think that might just be almost a relic of the fact that the water system treated water very effectively, sort of.
And a natural experiment here is that the rationale behind the work was any health service had installed a point of use arsenic filters previously, and they were not done by people in the community. They were done by an outside company. And the intervention wasn't very successful. There were multiple reasons for that. One was because of the replacement cartridges, which was a major one. But also was likely because of the lack of trust.
Well, sure. It just wasn't tested.
What is the volume that can be treated by these cartridges?
So we estimated 960 gallons. And so Captain David Harvey, he helped to do that calculation. And we did look at the geochemistry of the water ahead of time. We looked at silica and some other water quality parameters. We published that in 2019. But we found that 960 was the estimated volume. But we actually think that that's not true. Because 960 was very conservative when we put that number, but we think based on the life of the filter going for a lot longer, that it could be potentially more than that. But it depends a lot on the water usage, and we installed water meters, but they had a battery problem. And so the batteries kept dying on the filter, the water meters, and whenever they died or reset it. And so basically, we weren't able to track the quantity of water that was passing through the filter. But I think your work, that you're going to embark on now is going to be really important to look at the longevity of the filter devices that you developed.
Well, certainly that 1,000 gallons isn't very many days of supply if you actually use it for more than very sparingly as tap water, right? Like,
Yeah, drinking and cooking is what we're promoting.
yeah, even if you used it for your only drinking water source, it would still only last for a family of 4, like a few months according to the math.
That's true, but beverages, the people are drinking sodas and juices and so things beyond that. But I agree that overall, if they were drinking it exclusively, it wouldn't last for a long time.
And it could be an underestimation, could be more.
Yeah, we need a study that has the water meter that's functional for the longevity until you observe a failure. But we didn't do that here.
Yeah, the meter was, Christine really wanted to have the meters. It was a source of tension between the two of us because the meter was so difficult to do. And me, I wanted to be as simple as possible because the study was so difficult. And I would say, let's forget about the meter, but Christine really wanted to have the meter, which I, appreciate.
Yeah, we need a
Because she
different
really
meter.
had-
I would go the other way.
You need a
Rather
different
than
meter.
Flow meter, what you want is an arsenic meter. I mean,
Exactly.
I think that's why,
An arsenic meter would be.
we really
perfect.
want this real-time measurement.
To measure the arsenic concentration over
Yes.
time.
And
I
then
think you can do that cheaper than the flow meter.
But when it dies though, we don't know what quantity passed through the filter though, do we?
It doesn't matter if you
Could be a
don't.
mechanical meter,
Okay.
little impellers, rhythm change, you can buy those.
Uh-huh.
So then you don't.
With a count, yeah.
With a
The
count.
trick with those is on slow flow rates, they really have a hard time working.
Right.
They're just not engaged.
So the question on compensation is about whether the participants were compensated.
Okay, that's a great question. So yes, the participants were compensated for their participation in the study. That's important because we're taking their time.
But then there are issues of overcompensating sometimes too.
So this was something that was discussed in partnership with the community, and we had to go through and get their approval of the local IRB within the nation.
Yeah, they gave us the guidance.
I have a question about the trick to increase flow rate. Kinetics are important in these filters. Do you know more about how the flow rate was increased? And isn't it that you might be actually not having the filters do as well? Because
So I can share the schematic that we developed, that any health service put together based on the recommendation by the participant. But as you saw from our results, it didn't impact the removal
The water,
capacity of
the
the
water was
filter.
perfectly treated.
Sure, but you see my point, there is kinetics,
Yeah, that's why
filters
it's
are
really
designed for flow rate.
It's really important to test it. That's why we make sure we tested the water to make sure that it was below the FCL.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, so is there anything else then? I wanted to thank everyone that's on the call. I see people that I've known through the years. So I saw that Chris Shuey was on there for a while, and I saw that Lisa was there also. Marissa, you did a wonderful job with your manuscript. I'm so glad that you're on the call, and Commander Bigaman. Oh, and also Commander Bolin. I'm really happy that you could be on the call, and Lisa. As well as Roland and your support with analyzing the samples. Captain David Harvey is there. I'm glad that you were able to attend. We have both best nuts. So that's wonderful. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending the meeting today. And I see Peter's there also. Thank you, Peter, for joining.
And thank you to you. Christine and Tracy and Missouri Breaks and everybody, Reno and everybody, amazing job in the health service, as you mentioned. We have an incredible study, so congratulations, Christine and
And thank you, Anna, for all of your support. Yeah, you supported things tremendously.
The manuscript is out.
It's under review at EHP.
So Kelly's paper is published already. Tracy's paper is published already. And then the primary outcome paper we submitted.
And qualitative is published.
And yeah, the qualitative manuscript is published, so we can share those to share on the.
Is mine
Super published. So
Yeah.
they sent me to prove the final proof today.
I got a final question. So when you reported back the results to the community, did you only report back the arsenic results, or did you also talk about the uranium results?
So we had a letter that we shared with the water arsenic results. We still need to we have a letter we haven't sent out yet with the urinary arsenic results. But I believe, Anna, you had an occupational guideline that we had used for that.
Yes,
I'm talking about the uranium.
the uranium, I don't think we reported the uranium at the time. No? It was-
We gave the baseline uranium.
The baseline uranium,
Yeah.
when we did the baseline, the testing, when we did the testing of all the houses, we reported the arsenic and the uranium.
And the-
It was higher. than
Yes,
30.
because the uranium was an exclusion criteria by Indian Health Service. If the uranium was high, the Indian Health Service didn't allow us to put the filter.
What was the logic of that?
The logic is because our filter didn't treat uranium.
And so you might as well submit them so they can.
No,
arsenic
no,
uranium.
We were going to do a special intervention to help those families.
Ah,
Which I believe hasn't happened, which I don't think it has happened, but this is something we can discuss with.
And they're on the call, so
Oh,
Commander
how
Bingham
many?
and Commander Bolin are
Yeah.
there.
Did we?
So you-
No, we know because we have the.
It will just be low.
No, I can't remember the number.
We can see there is no change. So the uranium didn't change at all.
And did the speciation of the urine suggest other sources other than water, or not?
other sources of water, it's possible that there are. other
You mean
sources.
organics, looking at the organics?
Like food or organic.
For arsenic,
Yeah.
yeah, we did the speciation, there is almost no signal. And we use the inorganic amendment with arsenic, yeah, that's it. Yeah, we need to add that to the slides. Okay, yeah, next.